Okay, so get this. You send over some research about tea and coffee.
Yeah.
And get this, it's about their potential to actually, like, fight off COVID-19. We've got these two papers here. One is all about coffee as, like, a preventative thing.
Yeah.
And the other one, it goes deep into the tannins in tea,
Oh.
specifically tannic acids and these things called proanthocyanidins. I mean, I am intrigued, but honestly, where do we even begin with all this?
Well, the tea research, it starts off with this super interesting observation. So they looked at data from like Statista, Worldometer, those websites that track all the global stats.
Yeah.
And they found something pretty striking. So countries where like people drink a lot of tea on average, they had lower COVID-19 death rates.
Really?
And this was true for both the like original virus and the Omicron variant.
So it wasn't like just a fluke, like tied to one specific strain.
Right.
That's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing it's not as simple as saying like tea drinkers are immune, right?
Right, exactly. This is what's called an epidemiological study.
Okay.
So it means it looks at patterns, like in large populations.
Okay.
It's a great starting point.
Mm-hmm.
But, it doesn't prove that tea caused the lower death rates. There are tons of other factors involved, like lifestyle, genetics, all sorts of things. But it's definitely a clue. It's like, hey, there might be something worth looking into here.
Okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
So how did the researchers go from that, like, global clue to zeroing in on these specific compounds in tea?
So they took a deep dive into tannins.
Okay.
So you probably know tannins as the things that make red wine dry.
Yeah.
Or that give tea its bitterness,
Right.
But scientifically, they're polyphenols that are found in a lot of plants. And they've actually shown some promise in anti-tumor research.
Oh, wow.
And now scientists are looking at their potential antiviral effects,
Mm-hmm.
So the researchers in the tea study, they specifically focused on those tannic acids. We'll call them TAs for short.
Okay.
And then proanthocyanidins, or PACs.
PACs. Okay. And so they found these tannins, like, just hanging out in tea.
Yeah.
Would make sense, given the taste, I guess.
It was more sophisticated than that,
Oh.
although I like your style.
Tinks.
So they used this very precise method called UHPLC-RMS.
Okay.
Don't
worry about the acronym.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
What matters is it lets them measure the exact levels of those TAs and PACs in different teas.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really interesting. So less fermented teas, like green tea, were higher in PACs. But the highly fermented stuff, like a good Oriental Beauty tea, was loaded with TAs.
Okay, so different teas, different tannin profiles. I get it.
Right.
But how did they know if these tannins actually did anything to the virus? Did they, like, give the cells in a petri dish some tea?
Well, they needed a way to test this in a controlled environment.
Right.
So they used something called a pseudoviral particle assay.
Okay.
It's kind of like, think of it as building a harmless mock-up of the Sars-Cov-2 virus, But it can still infect cells in a lab.
Ah, so they built like a tiny little virus battleground.
Exactly.
And then they unleashed the tea tannins on it.
Exactly. So they use extracts from two teas.
Okay.
That Sunlink Sea High Mountain tea, remember it was high in PACs, and then Oriental Beauty, which was packed with TAs.
Uh-huh.
And the results were pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Both teas significantly reduced the infection rates.
Ah.
This was true for the original strain of the virus and even the Delta variant.
So score one for the tea drinkers.
Right.
But wait, how did they know for sure that it was the tannins doing all the work and not something else in the tea?
You're thinking like a scientist.
Oh, shucks.
So to isolate the effect, they used a solvent called ethyl acetate.
Okay.
And they very carefully removed the TAs and the PACs from the tea extracts.
Okay.
Think of it like taking the weapons away from the tea ninjas.
Okay, so they disarmed the tea.
Yes. And then, without the tannins, the tea's ability to inhibit the virus, it really plummeted. Yeah, it was much less effective.
Wow.
So that gives us really strong evidence that the TAs and the PACs are the key players in tea's, antiviral activity.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But the virus, it's always evolving, right?
Right.
Did they try this with any of the newer variants?
They did. And this is where it gets even more interesting. They looked at the XBB.1.5 Omicron variant.
Okay.
The one that's known for evading immunity.
Right.
They wanted to see if the tannins could still, hold their own.
Right. Okay.
And what they found was that certain components of the teas, especially the ones that were rich in EGCG, were effective at inhibiting this variant too.
EGCG, that rings a bell. Isn't that one of those like health-boosting compounds in green tea?
That's right. It's a type of catechin that's been studied for all sorts of like potential benefits.
Yeah.
And now its antiviral activity is getting a lot of attention. What's really remarkable is that the tannins, specifically in the tea study, they were also found to potentially inhibit TMPRSS2, which, if you remember, is that cellular protein that acts as a gateway for the virus to enter our cells.
Hold on. Didn't we hear about that TMPRSS2 protein in the coffee research too?
You have a sharp memory.
Well, I try.
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating things about these two papers. They're both looking at ways to block the same entry point for the virus, but they use different mechanisms.
So it's like tea and coffee are both targeting the virus's weak spots.
Yeah.
But they're like using different strategies.
Exactly.
It's getting really exciting. But before we tell everyone to ditch their masks and just start like chugging lattes, what did the coffee research actually involve?
Well, instead of isolating specific compounds like the tannins in tea, they looked at coffee extracts as a whole. They wanted to see how these extracts would interact with the virus's ability to infect cells. And you know what? The coffee extracts were able to inhibit viral infection.
What?
But get this, by targeting not just TMPRSS2, but also MPRO, which is a viral enzyme that's essential for the virus to replicate.
Okay, so while the tea tannins might be acting like bouncers at the cell door, the coffee extracts are more like saboteurs, like disrupting the virus from the inside.
Exactly. It's like having a multi-pronged defense system against the virus.
Yeah. Talk about a double whammy.
Right.
I've got to say, I'm starting to see my morning coffee in a whole new light.
Yeah.
But this is all lab research, right? What about the real world? Does any of this translate to actually protecting people from getting sick?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
We can't jump from test tubes to humans just yet. As promising as these findings are, we need more research.
Right.
And that research needs to be done in people, not just cells in a dish.
Yeah, it's one thing to see it in a lab, but the real world is so much more complicated.
Exactly. We need large-scale studies with humans to see if drinking tea or coffee actually means you're less likely to get COVID-19.
Yeah.
And those studies need to be well-designed. They need to take into account other factors that could influence the results.
Right.
Things like, age, other health conditions, lifestyle, even genetics.
Sure.
It's not as simple as just saying, drink tea, you won't get sick.
Right.
And plus, we're not just talking about generic tea or coffee here.
Right.
There's a whole world of variety within those categories.
Yeah.
I imagine that the type of tea, how it's brewed, whether you add milk or sugar, even the type of coffee beans, how they're roasted, all of that could play a role in how these compounds act in the body.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this research so intriguing.
Right.
It's like we've just started to understand how the things that we consume every day, how they might be interacting with our health, like at a molecular level.
Absolutely.
And it makes you wonder, like, what other secrets are hiding in our pantries and fridges?
Exactly.
What really strikes me is that these studies aren't just about COVID-19. They're hinting at a much bigger picture, right? The tea research, for example, it didn't just stop at the antiviral effects.
Yeah.
They found a link between drinking tea and the gut microbiome.
Yes.
That whole community of microorganisms in our digestive tract.
That was a very interesting part of the study.
Yeah.
They found that drinking tea was associated with changes in the gut microbiome. Specifically, like increases in certain bacteria that are linked to positive health outcomes.
Okay.
One of those bacteria, it's called Coprococcus catus.
Got it.
It's been linked to lower blood pressure and a reduced risk of hypertension.
Hold on. Are you saying that drinking tea could potentially be influencing our blood pressure by changing the makeup of our gut bacteria?
That's what the research suggests.
That's incredible.
It's like a chain reaction. Tea, gut microbiome, blood pressure.
Right.
It really just highlights how interconnected our bodies are and how the things that we consume can have, far-reaching effects.
It's like our kitchens are alchemy labs.
Yeah.
Every cup of tea or coffee is a potion.
Right.
With all these potential benefits that we're just beginning to understand. But before we get too carried away, we should probably emphasize that these are still really early findings.
Right. We don't want to overstate the importance of further research.
Sure.
While these studies provide, compelling evidence for the potential of tea and coffee to combat SARS-CoV-2, and maybe even, influence other aspects of our health.
Right.
We need more data before we can make any definite recommendations.
It's like we've discovered a hidden treasure map.
Right.
But we still have to, like, dig to find the actual treasure.
That's a great analogy. And who knows what other treasures might be buried alongside it.
Okay, so if we were to, like, step back and summarize what we've learned today, what would be the key takeaways for our listener?
Well, I think the most important thing is that while it's too early to say for sure if drinking tea or coffee will actually protect you from getting COVID-19, these beverages clearly contain compounds with some pretty intriguing antiviral properties.
And it's not just about, fighting off one specific virus.
Yeah.
This research is suggesting that these compounds might be interacting with our bodies in ways that could have much broader implications for our overall health.
Exactly.
Like potentially influencing our gut microbiome and impacting things like blood pressure.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the complexity of human health and how the things we consume can play a surprisingly significant role in shaping that complexity.
This has been eye-opening. I know I'm going to look at my next cup of tea or coffee a little differently.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, is there anything else we should highlight for our listeners as they ponder their next cup?
Well, I think it's important to remember that even if future research confirms these benefits, tea and coffee shouldn't be seen as a replacement for other preventative measures.
Right.
Like getting vaccinated and following public health guidelines.
Right. It's all about a multi-layered approach
to
protecting ourselves and staying healthy.
Exactly.
But it's exciting to think that something as simple and enjoyable as a cup of tea or coffee could be a part of that strategy.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just protection.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our bodies and the world around us.
Right.
The food we choose, the beverages we enjoy, these things can have ripple effects that we're only just beginning to understand.
It's like a whole new dimension to those everyday choices we make.
Right.
Suddenly my morning coffee ritual feels a lot more impactful.
Exact.
And it makes you wonder, what else are we overlooking?
Right.
What other hidden connections are waiting to be discovered?
That's a good question.
This deep dive has definitely given me a whole new perspective on the power of food and drink. It's not just about calories and sustenance. It's about these complex interactions that are happening at a molecular level, influencing everything from our immune system to our gut health to maybe even our blood pressure.
Wow.
It's a reminder to approach our diets with, like, a sense of curiosity and a willingness to experiment.
Right.
Who knows what other, like, health-boosting secrets we might uncover?
That's a great point. Every meal becomes an opportunity for discovery.
Well, on that note, I think I'm going to go brew myself a cup of tea and ponder all the amazing things it might be doing inside my body.